This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
And I'm Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast, What the Hell is Going On? Mark, what the hell is going on in this country?
What the hell is going on in this country is we are having a miasma of anti-Semitism. It is in the wake of this Hamas attack on Israel. It is absolutely shocking what we are witnessing on college campuses across this country, in cities, in Times Square, in Sydney. It was happening abroad as well. It's like we've lifted a rock and all these just vermin and worms and bugs are like scurrying everywhere. We didn't realize they were there. We didn't realize how many of them were. We didn't realize how acceptable it seemed to be. You know, I remember not too long ago when they had the far-right, alt-right anti-Semitic protests in Charlottesville, and the universal condemnation of this far-right movement and Trump's, association with it and trying to wrap it around Donald Trump's neck. And so therefore everybody was against it, right? Because these were right-wing anti-Semites and there was anti-Semitism infecting the Republican Party. And of course, there were no members of Congress there. There were no conservative academics. These were a bunch of alt-right idiots who are marching. There are Charlottesvilles happening every single day in America right now, multiple ones. They're happening not in some town square with a bunch of, people with torches in Charlottesville. They're happening at Harvard. They're happening at Stanford. They're happening at Columbia. They're happening at the elite universities. They are happening on the mall on Capitol Hill with members of Congress addressing them and joining in on the miasma of hate against Jews. The silver lining of this moment in history, and if there can be a silver lining to what happened in Israel, is that people show you their true faces sometimes. And we are seeing the true face of anti-Semitism on the left. And it has infected the left. And there's a difference. And I really want to get because I'm thinking about writing a column on this. And I want to get your thoughts on it, Danny, because I think there's a fundamental difference between right-wing and left-wing anti-Semitism, which is a right-wing anti-Semitism is largely a fringe phenomenon. It's in the fever swamps. You have, the Marjorie Taylor Greens and their Jewish space lasers and stupid stuff like that, which, by the way, she apologized for. And I can't stand her, but at least I haven't seen Ilhan Omar apologize for anything. On the left, it's an elite phenomenon. It is in the halls of academia. It's in the halls of Congress. It's not a fringe thing. It is among the leadership, and they're either rest of the left, whether it be the normal Democrats on Capitol Hill, the academics who don't hate Jews, don't have the courage to stomp it out and say, no, you cannot be a member of the Democratic caucus of the House and also be a rabid anti-Semite. No, you cannot teach at Harvard and defend the raping and murdering and beheading of babies and raping of innocent women, men, and children and say that this is justified. This is not acceptable. They won't stamp it out, and so they are complicit in it. This is a huge, huge problem on the left.
Look, Mark, I, as you said, I thought that nothing would shock me more than the events of October 7th in Israel, the brutality of them. I thought nothing could shock me more than the decapitation of a baby. But the response, the doubting, the Jew hatred, the Hitler glorification that we have seen all over the world, not in Iran, in Sydney, Australia, not in Iran, in Paris, not in Iran, not in Gaza, in London. and on the campus of Harvard University, Columbia University, New York University. I don't know how our soldiers felt when they liberated concentration camps. And I'm not talking about FDR, who knew what was going on, or Eisenhower, who knew what was going on, but the rank and file guys who walked in and saw what happened, the piles of bodies, the dead people, the emaciated people. I don't know what they felt, but I imagine it's something akin to what I have felt over the last 2 weeks when I see the loathing for Jews just because they're Jews. I said this in our interview, but if you said the murderer of Martin Luther King was a national hero, you would be drummed off the stage in America. If you said that killing George Floyd really was legitimate, because after all, look at George Floyd, you would be drummed out of your job. But apparently, all those people, all those social activists, all those goddamned movie stars who have an opinion on everything from abortion to Donald Trump to police brutality to Black Lives Matters, they believe explicitly, that Jewish lives don't matter, that this is the one excusable crime left. You can murder Jews with impunity and no one needs to say anything because Jews.
Well, on campuses, if you misgender somebody, you can get fired. I
Yeah,
mean,
no
truly,
shit.
and these are the people who tell us that words are violence. The safety culture, right? I need safe spaces. I feel unsafe by what you're saying, and then the same idiots are chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is in translation for anybody who doesn't know what that means. It's the equivalent of saying kill the Jews, because what it means is we want to kill all the Jews and drive them out of Israel.
And we can't write off this. This isn't ignorance, Mark. That's the one thing I want to underscore. Because you know what? You can say to yourself, these college students are stupid. Okay, maybe they are. But the president of the University of Pennsylvania is not an idiot. The president of Harvard University
No, he's a coward.
is not an idiot. UPenn is a woman, but she is a coward. She is a disgrace to academia, a disgrace to this country. I want to tell you another story that happened last week that underscores just how disgusting and pervasive this is. Joe Biden has been very supportive of Israel, and when pressed at a certain moment for, Israel needs to have a ceasefire, said, we can talk about a ceasefire when all those hostages are released. I appreciated that strength. On the other hand, his dingbat spokeswoman, Karine Jean-Pierre, caused a huge scandal because she was asked about anti-Semitism and she dismissed it on the stage and talked instead about Islamophobia. And it's like, woman, do you not understand that it is not Muslims who represent 1% of our population and are 10% of our hate crimes, as opposed to Jews who are 2% of our population and more than 50% of hate crimes? There is an anti-Semitism problem, and it apparently pervades the White House press room as well. I was so angered and outraged by this, and I'm only happy that so many other people were as well.
So I want to give you some statistics to just show how pervasive this problem is. So Harvard-Harris poll just came out, and they asked the question to Americans, do you think the Hamas killing of 1,200 Israeli civilians on Israel can be justified by the grievances of Palestinians, or is it not justified? The good news overall, 76% of Americans said not justified, only 24% said justified, which 24 is too much. But then you go into the numbers by age. So, and keep in mind, this is rape, murder, rape so bad that pelvises were broken, women with their unborn children cut out of their bodies and stabbed to death, babies beheaded, children tied to their parents and burned together. Okay, is it justified? Just 65% and over, 9%. 55 to 64, 11% say it's justified. 45 to 54, 23%. 35 to 44, 39%. Then you get to the young people. 25 to 34, 48% say it's justified. That's almost half. And the 18 to 24-year-olds, the people on our college campuses right now, a 51% majority say it's justified. 51% of young Americans think that what was done on October 7th is justified. What the hell? What an indictment of our generation and how we raised our kids. That there are people who have done such a bad job in raising children that they've allowed anti-Semitism to infect half of America, half of young people in this country who could think that it's justified to do what was done. I mean, are they living under a rock? Have they not seen the videos of the blood-spattered homes in the kibbutzes? Have none of these kids ever been to a music festival? Can they not empathize? I mean, these are kids who go out and party all night long, go to music festivals, and they saw guys in paragliders fly in on a music festival. These are their peers. These are kids like them who are absolutely massacred, and they say it's justified? What is wrong with young Americans? I mean, I fear for our country that these people. I mean, maybe they'll outgrow it. Maybe they'll, as they get older, they'll be more like the older cohort. But God help us, we are in a world of hurt in a few years when these people start running the country.
We are in a world of hurt because these inhumane creatures, these execrable examples of humanity are being hired from elite schools at law firms, at companies, and they're going to bring their unique brand of hatred to the C-suites of America. I have been super proud. There are a couple of organizations out there, Stop Antisemitism, Stand With Us, that have been ruthless in exactly the way I believe that the Jewish people need to be ruthless, which is not to hide your face, not to be afraid to go out, not to be afraid to stand up for your people, for Israel, for humanity, okay? And they have been single-handedly identifying people in these pictures, identifying these letter signers, name-calling them, and then letting their prospective employers or their current employers know they support Hitler, they support gassing the Jews, they support decapitating babies. And for every one of those people that has been fired, for every Winston and Strawn, that courageous law firm that withdrew its employment offer to that NYU law school animal, and I there's no other word for her, who celebrated what Hamas did, right? There are hundreds more that are not being done, that are not taken care of. And I want to know who all these people are, because I absolutely believe that we need to challenge their employers. Are you gonna subsidize this hater? Would you hire a racist?
Exactly. Well, that's the thing.
Then don't hire these creatures.
And then there's some people are saying, well, this is just, we have to be consistent. We are against cancel culture, so therefore we can't be canceling people on this. No, very, very different. Very, very different. This is not canceling people because they professed an unpopular but legitimate political argument. This is, if you wouldn't hire a neo-Nazi and you think that that is a line that you as a business or a law firm or somebody else wouldn't cross, then you can't hire an anti-Semite either. You cannot hire somebody who marches in favor of the massacre of Jews. I'm sorry. That's a line that we should all agree it should not be crossed, and there should be consequences for that. And by the way, free speech doesn't mean all it means is the First Amendment is they can't put you in jail for your opinions, right? But it doesn't mean there's no consequences for your opinions. You want to stand up and say stuff like that, you should be shunned by society.
Let's talk about that scumbag, Rushda Tlaib, Democratic congresswoman who has been single-handedly, along with her pal Ilhan Omar, supporting Hamas, supporting their propaganda. Rushda Tlaib, after it was definitively proven that the Israelis didn't hit the hospital in Gaza, doubled down and insisted that it was the Israelis. I want to know, why hasn't she been censured?
We should kick those people off of their committees. And by the way, Ilhan Omar, I know we got to get to our guest because we're talking too much, and she is absolutely brilliant. But just last thought, Ilhan Omar, who is a virulent anti-Semite, who said that support for Israel is all about the Benjamins, who supports the BDS anti-Semitic BDS movement, who retweeted the winner of the Holocaust denier cartoon contest in Iran, who is just a rabid anti-Semite. You know what Nancy Pelosi did when she said all those things? She not only didn't punish her, she put her on the Foreign Affairs Committee, which is the committee setting U.S. policy towards Israel. So, we need some accountability on Capitol Hill as well. And the Democrats, they're very vocal in telling us Republicans about how we need to police our movement and get rid of the Trump, wing and all the rest of this stuff. Police your own movement. Your job is to police your movement and to kick these anti-Semites out of your caucus. And all those people should be kicked out of their committees. They should be kicked out of the Democratic caucus. And they're just afraid of their frigging shadows over there and not willing to do it. So don't tell me about extremism in the Republican Party when you're tolerating it and promoting it on Capitol Hill.
Amen to that.
That's all I got to say on
Amen.
that.
We could go on for ages, but as you say, our guest is just fantastic. Ruth Weiss has been with us before. She's just a voice of clarity, and I'm so grateful for her. She's the Martin Peretz Professor of Yiddish Literature and Comparative Literature Emerita at, of all places, Harvard University, and we talked to her about that. She is a truly preeminent scholar of Yiddish and American culture, literature, and she is the author of her own memoir, Free as a Jew, and has been looking at this question of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Wonderful book that came out some years ago, If I Am Not for Myself, The Liberal Betrayal of the Jews, is just such an important book as well.
Here's our interview. Well, Ruth, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Mark.
It's so great to have you back. And of course, it's under unfortunate circumstances with what's happening in Israel and what's happening with the absolute slaughter of so many innocent civilians. And I just have to say, I have been shocked by the reaction on the left, on college campuses and Congress, other places, the anti-Semitism that is just raging. I was just visiting my son up in Amherst, and we were driving through town, and there were, pro-Hamas protesters on the traffic circle in Amherst, Massachusetts. What is going on with anti-Semitism? First of all, what is anti-Semitism, and what is happening with left-wing anti-Semitism?
Well, I have to tell you that I find myself surprised by the degree of my shock at all of this. I wrote a book about anti-Semitism, Jews and Power. I've been thinking about this and trying to explain it and understand it for the better part of my life. And I think I can speak cogently on the subject, but I agree with you. I find that what is happening is overwhelming. And, of course, there's no comparison, but I am just as frightened about what is happening to America as I am at this moment about what is happening in Israel. The situation in Israel is much direr because, of course, there the anti-Semitism comes in this form of a barbarism that in some ways exceeds anything that we've seen in our lifetime. And my lifetime, by the way, is much longer than your guys. But what's happening here is really frightful because to get to the point, anti-Semitism really has nothing to do with the Jews. It points at the Jews. It blames the Jews. It uses the Jews as its vehicle. But anti-Semitism is about the anti-Semites, those who need this, those who have formed this ideology, who constitute this movement, who use this movement, and it is one of the most destructive movements that we know of, because it destroys every society that actually uses it. And it destroyed Germany entirely. And it certainly has to destroy the societies because it is a very powerful political tool. And it's a political tool that serves its users very well in the short run. And we can talk about all its functions and why it becomes so popular and why it becomes so effective. But the more effective it becomes, the more debilitating it is, because, of course, what it is, it's a deflection of real problems in a society. And instead of solving those problems, instead of addressing those problems, those who embrace anti-Semitism are really using it to blame the wrong party and to gin up violence against the wrong party. And the longer it is allowed to, proceed, and the more successful in its own sense it becomes, the more horrifically it destroys its society. So really, I would say that America is in very, very bad shape if this can take hold to the degree that it has in such a really short period of time.
So, Ruth, first of all, thank you. Thank you for being with us. I think Mark and I feel exactly the same way you do. You know anti-Semitism exists in society. You know that there are people who hate Jews for being Jews. You know that there are nasties on both the left and the right. We saw them in Charlottesville. We've seen them everywhere. But it is the breadth of the anti-Semitism. It is the expression in Sydney, in my home country of Australia, when a pro-Palestine demonstration chants "gas the Jews," that's about something else going on, as you say. What I want to ask you about, and there are so many things I want to ask you, but what I want to ask you about is this distinction that anti-Semites love to make between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. I don't hate the Jews, I hate Israel. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's very interesting. Anti-Semitism is a movement, actually, that began in Germany in the 1870s. And the person who actually defined it, Wilhelm Marr, said that anti-Semitism was not, Christianity. It was not Christian anti-Judaism. It said the same thing. It distinguished itself from what went before. So in a way, it absorbed many of the demonic qualities of it, what it came from. But anti-Semitism defined itself as a new political movement. And it is a movement. And here I would say that I try to make a distinction between prejudice, bias, hatred, and so on the one hand, and this movement, this political movement of anti-Semitism on the other. Because this isn't just your hatred. Some people have this prejudice. Why do they dislike people? One of my teachers once said, the great historian Salo Baron said that anti-Semitism is the dislike of the unlike. And it sounds so wonderful, but of course it's all wrong, because the dislike of the unlike, it works for, African Americans. It can work for Asians. The dislike of the unlike is a universal quality. There are many, many people who dislike the unlike. Anti-Semitism, the organization of politics against the Jews, is something very distinctive, because this is a political movement, and it is to be taken very seriously, because people are trying to get power through this, and they are coming to power through this. And anti-Semitism has so many great political functions. That's one of the reasons it's become, in my mind, the most successful ideology of modern times, right? So if you think of, I know it sounds ridiculous because you're still thinking that it has to do with the Jews. How can this little people generate the most successful ideology of modern times? But if you see the way it was used, and you see the way it's being used now and has been used by the Arab and Muslim world since 1945, and certainly since 1948, you see what it does. Look at it, for example, as a coalition builder. Where else do you have a movement that is such a coalition builder? So in Germany, what it did when Wilhelm Marr founded this as an anti-liberal movement, he could say, look, you're unemployed. You know why you're unemployed? It's because of the Jews. The church is failing. You know why the church is failing? It's because of the Jews. Your country is being taken over by the press is being taken over. Yes, the press is being taken over, and the music is being taken over, and culture is being taken, and the legal profession is being taken. They're everywhere. And what he said was that the Jews are conquering Germany from within. And he built around that a movement. Now, this began in the 1870s. Think of how long it took for the first politician to be elected on this platform. The first politician was elected on this platform in Vienna 20 years later. And then 20 years after that, you have Hitler coming to power on this movement. Because, you see, this is the only ideology, anti-Semitism, that is entirely anti. It declares itself anti. So if you say communism, well, communism promises something. Fascism promises something. Democracy promises something. Everything promises. But anti? All you have to do is be against the Jews. And we can organize so many people. So if you think of intersectionality and how this preposterous thing happened, that the, quote, Palestinian movement became the flagship, the leading star of the whole intersectional movement. You see what I mean by coalition building? There is no other entity that could have united all these disparate movements of grievance and blame. What they have in common is that they are all movements of grievance and blame, and they all coalesce. But let me ask you, okay, part of African American movement that is Black Lives Matter, or, you know, the violent or the extreme part of that movement, the extreme part of the feminist movement, the extreme part of the LBGJ movement, the extreme part of all the movements, you see, what they're really against are parts of America. And what this movement is really about is really the left, or whatever you're going to say, but what unites them is all parts of America. What unites them all? What could unite them all? And oddly enough, here you have this entity. They all unite against the negative image of Israel. Now, one of the questions people are always asking, what's the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism? Well, anti-Semitism was the organization of politics against the Jews in dispersion among all the countries. Anti-Zionism is the organization of politics against the Jews in their homeland, in their country. So it's exactly the same phenomenon. And the tragic thing for the Jews, and this is truly a tragedy, that Herzl and the whole Zionist movement conceived of Zionism partly, not entirely, but partly, as a response to anti-Semitism. They said, you see why all these countries are against us. It's because we don't have our own homeland. It's because we're dispersed among all the nations. They all think that we're, hanging out in their territories. They don't want us. There will never be a liberal Europe, he thought, unless we take the Jews out. And he was worried about European liberalism, because how did liberalism become illiberal? How did it become anti-Semitic? He thought one of the answers would be, if you take Jews out of the equation, then you would never have this monstrous political movement again. Well, lo and behold, that wasn't true at all. What happened is it simply morphed into anti-Zionism. And by the way, anti-Zionism is the only thing that unites the left and the right, which are absolutely polarized otherwise. But this was the great thing. Hitler could say the Jews are capitalists and the Jews are communists. He said both. And laugh we may, but he united both the communists and the fascists on this one common thing that they had, you see. So, it's been a frustration to me why political science, for example, has never taken this seriously. It has never studied this most serious phenomenon in modern politics, this most corrupting element in modern politics. And let's just say how corrupting it is. You can see where have we seen barbarism of the kind that has just been manifest in southern Israel. I mean, you had young men, and they're now showing this, posting on the cell phones that they took from their victims, a young man saying, "Look, Dad," in Arabic, "Look, Dad, I've got my hands bloody from having killed all these people. Are you proud of me? Aren't you proud of me?" Now, we think of ourselves as, human beings. But the people on the campuses that are shouting from river to the sea, Palestine will be free, well, what they're yelling is death to the Jews, because from the river to the sea is the land of Israel. Small as it is, that's where it exists, between the river and the sea. So when they say, between the river and the sea, Palestine will be free, they are really saying, kill the Jews. And that's what they mean. That is what they mean. You see, they have constructed this entity that they hate or that they are against, which encompasses everything that they are not. And they want to destroy it. And these are Americans now, right? These are Americans. And these are people in our midst.
And these are people at school where you taught, Harvard University, and Columbia and Stanford and like all the elite institutions. One of the thoughts that I had, and I'd love to get your take on it, is, it was only a few years ago that we had the march in Charlottesville where the alt-right were chanting, "Jews will not replace us," and everybody came out and condemned it. Right? And it was the worst thing that had ever happened, and all the rest of it. Those people were sort of fringe. They weren't members of Congress. They weren't Harvard students. They were alt-right fever swamps of the right. Here we have dozens of Charlottesvilles happening every single day, and they're happening at Harvard, and they're happening at Stanford and all these elite universities, and they've got members of Congress coming and speaking at these rallies and reveling in the anti-Semitism. Talk to us a little bit about the contradiction there and the differences in America today in right-wing and left-wing anti-Semitism, because it seems like left-wing anti-Semitism, unlike right-wing anti-Semitism, is an elite phenomenon. It's happening amongst the most educated. It's happening in the most elite institutions, in the halls of Capitol Hill, in the halls of academia. How is this ideology taken root in the elite institutions?
Well, I think that's a very powerful question, and I think that that's a question that these elite institutions are the ones that should be asking themselves. Unfortunately, they're not. So one of the answers to that is quite simple. I was at Harvard, and I watched this develop. And Harvard, and I'm just using Harvard here, as you say, as one of the schools, because it was happening everywhere. So this didn't happen by accident. Look, in 1975, at the United Nations, see, the Arab and Muslim leaders are basically responsible for this phase of anti-Zionism. They own it, because in 1948, when the State of Israel was created, as a member of the United Nations exists on the premise that it is for all nations, large and small. But from the moment that Israel was created, the Arab League was founded on one unifying principle alone, And what was that? What could unite 21 Arab countries? What could unite the Shiites and the Sunnis and all their factions? Only one thing united them all those years, and that was organization against Israel, against the Jewish people in its country. And it was a fantastic organizing principle, and they kept going back to it, even though it split apart many times and so forth. It's still the only glue, fading a little bit, but you can see how it's still called upon. Okay, so we have that. And then they lose wars. They try to destroy Israel by war. It doesn't work. They try to destroy Israel by war. It doesn't work. And they're supported by who else but the Soviet Union. Now, here's where you get your left wing. The coalition in 1975 passed at the United Nations, it passed a resolution saying that Zionism is racism. Now, wrap your head around that. Zionism is racism. In other words, it was anti-Zionism that was racism. Anti-Zionism refused to allow the Jews to have their homeland. The Arabs and Muslims have 640 times more land than the Jews. There are 1 billion people, as opposed to, 13 million Jews at this point in all the world, or 14 million? I mean, it's preposterous. The asymmetry between these two sides is monstrous, you see. It's unbelievable. It's never been a war. It's been this ideology of destruction. So in 1975, there's now a new coalition formed between the Arab bloc and the Soviet bloc. And they are the ones who passed this resolution. Zionism is racism. Well, you see, it stood on the books of the United Nations until 1991, but it was never really withdrawn. I mean, it was pumped into the world. And then from the 1970s on, you have young people from these countries that actually believe that Zionism is racism. You have to understand that people who come from countries like, even today, Egypt, those countries still believe those things. So they come to the United States, they come to these colleges, some of them teach in these colleges, teach in Middle Eastern institutes, and they promote these ideas, and they promote this coalition, a left-wing coalition of Zionism is racism. Now, isn't that a neat inversion? Everyone's talking about racism, and the university's against racism, and you have indoctrination that you should not be a racist. And here you have someone telling you, hey, Zionism is racism. Well, it fits, you see. And so it becomes adopted by the universities, and it's taught in the Middle East programs. It is actually taught. It begins to be taught in social science programs. I hate to say it because it is adopted by large parts of African American studies. It certainly is adopted by large parts of the women's movement, which is also against patriarchy. Well, what represents patriarchy more than Jewish men, right? And so forth. So, as staggering as this is, it really becomes like a true snowballing effect. And it grows from the time I came to Harvard in 1993 to the time I left in 2014. I mean, it was already, and I went, by the way, personally, to every single dean that came in, every new president that came. It's only Lawrence Summers that took it on at Harvard. And he himself made his first speech. He said, this anti-Israel, this petition to boycott Israel is anti-Semitic in effect, if not in intent. How sweet that was. It was wonderful. Well, that was it. The minute he said that, he was a dead man. And the coalition to get rid of him formed right then and there. And within 5 years, they had all coalesced. The women's movement coalesced to get him out. African American studies, and everyone else who didn't like him on campus coalesced. But it was all that first speech that announced it. He wanted to protect the school from anti-Semitism. Well, they weren't having any of that. So it's filthy. There's a Polish expression that I once pinned up on my wall. It says, "It is a terrible thing to swim upstream in a filthy river," right? And this is what one feels one is doing with this subject.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You are swimming upstream in a filthy river. I guess you've talked about why it is that there's been such uptake, generational uptake among millennials, among Gen Z, among young people, particularly in elite institutions. There's no question that they get to live in their own petri dish. That's one thing. And so, you're not watching the news, you're not reading the same papers. And so you do get to create your own environment that reinforces your views. But it is as if there is no counter programming either. When I was in school, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, my 8th grade teacher authored a curriculum that was very much in use in the 1980s called Facing History, which was an education about the Holocaust. You may not have liked the Jews. Maybe you thought Hitler did a good thing, but you knew what happened. That's all gone from the American education system. Is there some blame that we can put on our system for failing to teach history that enables this anti-Semitism, this violent, virulent, bloodthirsty, yucky river to flourish?
Well, look, you've touched on a very strange subject. You see, personally, I was always against Holocaust education for very good reason. Yes, of course, because the idea that showing the Jews as cadavers was going to be therapeutic in some way, or was going to raise sympathy for them, or was going to be like the resurrection. I think that people saw it in a Christian model, that if you saw, Jesus on the cross and you saw the Jewish people on the cross, well, this would be redemptive if you showed it. Well, God, I never thought there was a worse idea and I fought it at every room, but of course, there were other things pushing.
I didn't know that.
Yes. So, yes, because of course I knew that if you showed the Jews as being that vulnerable, what would happen is that people would say, let's get them. What fun. I mean, I saw immediately that what you would want is a copycat effect. If you can have so much fun, you see the Jews, they look so great. They are so satisfied with themselves. They could live in any circumstances. Look at Israel. What a wonderful, prosperous country. I can't bear it. Why should those people get away with it? I am going to smash them. And when you see on a campus Jews, they look so innocent in there. Look, they have good families and they look so wealthy and they look so smart and everything. Let's get them. And what fun that is. You can just see what fun they're having out there. It's a love fest of hate. And that's something that one should not discount. The fun of sadism, the fun that they're able to have in the name of some political ideology, like let's cleanse the world of Jews or let's cleanse the world of Israel. This is not madness. There's a tremendous something that's very comprehensible about it when you see people whose own polities are so dysfunctional. Now, let me just say one thing, though. The number of people whom this affects should not be exaggerated. This is a minority in America. The problem is that in order to destroy it, you would have to have a large majority getting rid of it. You would have to have a large majority like the Danes in Europe. We always say, why didn't everyone behave like the Danes when Hitler took Denmark? Well, Hitler came into Denmark. He wanted to rid it of the Jews the same way he wanted to rid every other country. Well, other countries kicked in, or at least they let the thing happen. But Denmark didn't. They undertook to make sure that the Jews got to safety. They got into it, and they stopped even Hitler with his armies. Now, in America, it wouldn't take all that much. All you would take is for the Democratic Party to absolutely say, we expel those members who say that it's Israel's fault. If the Democratic Party were to undertake to say, I'm sorry, anyone who says that Israel is illegitimate, anyone who denies Israel's, just obvious right to exist, pulls it into question, we don't want them in the party. That would be huge. Any university said, anyone who teaches that is not going to be in that university teaching any longer. That would do it. In other words, the minute good people began to act on what they know is bad, is evil, and put some muscle into it, this would begin to diminish rather than grow. But as long as good people don't do it, then of course it will flourish. Because as I say, it's so much fun. These kids have, they come from dysfunctional countries. And you would think that the people who got into government, and you think that the people who came to America would use the freedoms that we have here to teach their countries about how to improve their political lives and their societies. You'd think that they would try to bring the model of something here back to their countries. But no, that's too difficult. What they'd rather do is to import the anti-Zionism of their countries and bring it into America and say, hey, this is us. We're proud anti-Zionists. We proudly want to destroy the state of Israel. That's our identity. And so it's the universities that have allowed this to happen. And increasingly the boardrooms and increasingly even the halls of government. And even though it's very, as I say, it's still I'm not sure it has reached the tipping point, but it is about to. And what has happened in Israel is just the tipping point for sure. Because if people can look at those horrors, you see, the Nazis did not advertise their horrors when they committed them. It was only after the war that people, were shocked. We did not know, right? They did not advertise what they were doing, these experiments on bodies and so forth. But these kids, that's what they're selling. And they're selling it to American kids too. Look what we can do with those Jewish bodies. Look, we can take babies and take a little pile of Jewish babies and burn them. We can just take these Jewish women and we can just not only rape them, but then we can cut them all up so that you can't even recognize whose body it is. That's what they're advertising. So it is monstrous. And I really think that perhaps of all professions, I think that, at least in the university, it's the profession of political science and of social science that is most to be really questioned. What the hell have you been doing if you have not been investigating this?
It's fascinating because we usually think of prejudice as a function of ignorance. That people who are uneducated and who are struggling in life and want to blame somebody else for their inability to succeed and thrive, they find a scapegoat. But here, it's the most educated people who are embracing this. It's the Harvard professors and the faculty and the students at these universities. It's people who are elected to the United States Congress and who speak on the floor of the greatest deliberative body in the world who are embracing this. Explain how this can be an elite phenomenon.
Well, Mark, the greatest teacher I had and one of the greatest scholars I knew is a man by the name of Max Weinreich. He was a man who wrote The History of the Yiddish Language, which is in 4 volumes. It's available in English translation. It's a marvelous, marvelous study. Well, my teacher, Max Weinreich, took time off during the war to write a very important book called Hitler's Professors. He had gotten his PhD in a German university, and he wrote this book about Hitler's professors to answer your question. You see, that's where fascism began. You think of it as some movement that began in the sewers of, with some lame brain, Hitler not being perhaps the smartest person in the world, though certainly not the stupidest. But he shows that this was a movement fueled by professors, Nobel Prize winners. They loved it. They loved the inversion of it. They loved the idea of holding the Jews responsible for the aggression against them. It's such a neat inversion. It is really a mind game, in a way, you see. Anti-Semitism is quite clever in its way. It inverts everything. It's a kind of an Orwellian game that one plays, you see. And it's waged against a people that has no incentive for counter-aggression. So, you see, if you're against the Americans, by the way, I think that there's a lot of anti-Americanism in this. This is basically an anti-American movement. But I can't go out there and be anti-American because America's huge. And I'm going to get smashed by some people if I say that I'm anti-American. But anti-Jewish, the Jews themselves are not going to come at me because we know the nature of the Jews. They have no incentive for counter-aggression because Jews are a minority by choice. And their strategy has always been to integrate themselves into other people's territories. I mean, Israel is the tiniest country that always understood that it would live among the nations. Jews have no problem living among the nations. Coexistence is in the DNA of Jews, but it's not in the DNA of other peoples, you see. And so this metastasizes, and it grows, and it becomes, the uglier it becomes, the more attractive it becomes in many ways. People have a lot of aggression, and when you give them an outlet for it, and you say, hey, this is an idea, they grab it. I say a lot of people grab it, a lot of people need it, apparently.
Exit question from me. Because we've kept you longer, as we always do, than promised. You talked about the Jews as victims. You talked about Jews being perceived as a group that will not fight back. And what I'm watching, certainly now, is some stronger efforts to fight back than I've seen historically. Efforts to identify, people who are out there in the streets and actually cause consequences for them, cause, arrests. But this is probably only a tiny percentage of the masses that are out there, the hundreds of thousands in France, the thousands and thousands in England, the thousands and thousands we're seeing in the United States. How do you fix this?
Well, I think that to some extent, I think American Jews also have to undertake some responsibility for this. Because, we have tried to say, as we used to say as kids, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. So a lot of Jews have been very willing to just say, well, this is going to go away. Not stand up and be counted. But I think that now you see on campuses, younger Jews are really beginning to mobilize. You're seeing what is most important, law firms saying, I want the names of those students, I am not going to hire them. You need every single CEO in this country doing exactly that, saying, I want the names of those people who want to destroy Israel and who are getting their jollies in these movements. I want the names of those people. I will never hire them. If I see that person on Twitter and on X, and I see them posting these things, and I know this about them, forget about it. You think the Me Too movement called people out? Well, wait till you see us calling people out. We are going to call people out. And I think that that's the muscle. That's what I mean by the muscle. You really have to have now at this point a very serious counter movement to say we are not going to tolerate this anymore. No one can call the legitimacy of Israel into question. And no one can use the phrase of free Palestine as a Orwellian formulation for kill the Jews of Israel. Right? We won't allow it. And I think that is that's our challenge at this point, to see whether we can stop a movement that still can be stopped before it gets even more out of control.
That's why it's so important also for Israel to just absolutely smash Hamas. Because it sends a message not just to Hamas, not just to the region, but also to the world, that the Jews will retaliate. They're actually not going to take this anymore. And they have a country and they have a military and they're not beholden to others to defend them. And, I think it's a two-front struggle. Israel, the IDF has to smash Hamas. And I think here in the United States, we have to smash these people who are their fellow travelers, and make them pay a price, just like Hamas has to pay a price for what it did. If Hamas, terrorizes, women and children in the way they did, they have to pay a price. And if you're out there chanting in favor of them on a college campus, guess what? You're going to pay a price too. It's not going to be the same price. It's going to be a price with your career. It's going to be a price with your reputation.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like that's where our university leaders are today. And so my exit question for you is this. We've got the rise of the anti-racism movement, this whole movement on college campuses, where all the universities are falling over themselves to confront their past discrimination, right? We have to make amends to the slaves that built Harvard and built Yale and built Georgetown and all the rest of it. And there's a whole history of anti-Semitism in these universities too. The whole, holistic admissions process, it was designed because there were too many Jews getting in. We had to keep the Jews out. We have to suppress the Jews from getting into our universities and polluting our schools. Where is this sort of self-reflection amongst the people of goodwill in these universities to recognize that they have a history of anti-Semitism in their universities and they have a higher responsibility than anybody else to confront this head on and take it on? Where is that self-awareness?
Well, one would do with a little bit less than that even. You're asking for a lot. I don't know whether mea culpas are going to do us much good at this point. I think what they have to do is to reverse course. But may I just say that the more troubling thing is that they use this, you see, too. I think that university professors may be very happy, you see, that this deflection of attention on the Jews and this concentration of violence against the Jews and of violent speech against the Jews and all the rest of it, well, listen, it's not coming at us. It's not coming at those who are running the universities the way it did in the 60s. So good. I'm really happy that this is really happening to the Jews. I don't mind it being directed against them because, you see, it sort of cushions me. And that's one of the functions of anti-Semitism, too. People let it flourish because it's not coming against them. And they don't see the connection between violence that is ginned up in the society and that violence being directed against them ultimately. You see, they don't see that. And so they let it flourish. And as I say, in some cases, they may even be, I wouldn't say happy, but they may even be relieved that it is not coming at them as it did in the 60s, as you know, overturning the universities. It's only overturning the Jews. Well, it's not overturning. Do you see the difference? But I have to say to you that I worry about America. This is an illness in America. This is poisoning this country. It is a vehicle for poison. Anti-Semitism is the carrier of a very a very negative, a very destructive ideology. And its real object is to gain power for itself against the polity within which it finds itself. And so I would take note.
Can I just ask one quick follow-up question? Do you
course.
see a connection between this new movement of anti-racism and anti-Semitism? They seem to be allied. And you started out by talking about how the anti is so much easier than the pro. They both seem to hate America. They both seem to be wanting to bring down success and prosperity and all the rest of it. Is there a connection between this new anti-racism as opposed to the civil rights movement, which was something different than this?
Very different. Very different. Well, can I tell you that in the summer of 1992, I know it very specifically because that was the summer that I decided to come to Harvard. And I started in the winter of 93. Well, in the summer before I came, Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, who is now very famous on PBS television, he was then in the African American Studies at Harvard. And he published an op-ed in the New York Times that I commend to you, really. It is the best analysis of Black anti-Semitism that you could read anywhere. And he wrote it, and the New York Times gave him a full page of the whole op-ed page devoted to his analysis. You read that analysis, and you see how keenly he understood the function of anti-Semitism in the Black movement at that time, at that moment when it was organizing. And he warned against it because he knew that it was a cheap out, that wasn't what was going to solve the problem of African American society. He knew that one would have to begin with a self-analysis, with a reform from the inside. He knew how difficult that would be, and he knew what a shortcut it was to try to blame others and then to try to externalize the blame rather than really solving the critical problems, which could only be done through the much more difficult and real process of self-liberation, really, of self-reform. So there you had it, 1992. Nobody can do it better than he did it in that article. Let me just say. So that's a long time ago. The analysis was already there. It was there in the university. But I might say that within 2 years, he never acted on it. When anti-Semitism began to really manifest itself, including in parts of his department, quiet. Never heard from him on the subject again.
That's one of the reasons why I so admired William F. Buckley for calling out Pat Buchanan right around the same period. A little bit later on, but because it took that courage to do that, not to just identify, but to call it out. So Ruth, you've been wonderful and super generous with your time. We both thank you for your clarity and your scholarship and your moral exactitude.
I'm very grateful to you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruth. Danny, what did you think?
There were there were more than two things, but there were two things that really stay with me. One is this argument that anti-Semites like to make, that they're not anti-Semites, they're just anti-Zionists. And that's just bullshit. Sorry, guys. When people talk about Jewish genocide of the Palestinians, I look at the increase in population in Gaza and the West Bank and ask myself, how well this genocide is going, right? This is the highest growth rate in the world, 4% of birth rate in Gaza. Jews are not, clearly, in addition to being not good at so many other things, Jews are not very good at genocide either. This small country of almost 10 million people, almost 2 million Israeli Arabs included in that. This is the problem in the Middle East of hundreds of millions of people. These are the genocide people. Not the Iranians, not the Syrians who killed 500,000 of their own people. No, it's just the Jews. It's the Jews. It's the Jews. So that's number one. And the other thing...
Well, first of all, Danny, the Jews secretly run the entire global economy. and yet they can't manage to wipe out the Palestinians. I mean, seriously, what's happening at these meetings? Is like
These meetings of the protocols of the elders of
I mean,
Zion.
the
Yeah,
elders of Zion are the most overrated, people ever. Because
yeah.
they're very
Because
bad. They're
they're
very
not
bad at
getting shit
genocide.
done.
Very bad.
They are very bad at genocide. They're very bad at wiping out the Palestinian population, which has increased like Topsy over the years. They're very bad at all those things. But hey, who cares?
By the way, can I just say one thing about the Palestinian population? The other day, I watched the movie Golda, which is
Yeah.
a spectacular movie. I encourage everybody to watch
Is
it. I
it
loved
good?
it. But I was watching some interviews with Golda Meir, and one of the things she said is, "I'm a Palestinian." Like it used to be everybody who lived there were Palestinians. It's like it wasn't Arabs who were just Palestinians. The Jews were Palestinians. It was the protectorate of Palestine. And so this idea that somehow Haviv was on the other day with us on the podcast, and he pointed out that 70% of the population of Israel are native. It's only 30% that are European. So I don't think that the Jews of Israel should cede the term Palestinian to Hamas and the rest of the crap. But that's an aside. I'm sorry.
No, listen, one of the things that I've been talking to my class about is, this expression militants versus terrorists. I just saw the Associated Press doesn't allow its reporters to call Hamas terrorists. Language matters. And actually, that's right. There were Jews in Palestine long before anybody thought of this as being quote-unquote Palestinian territory in the current meaning of the word. But that is a bigger discussion. The other thing, though, that Ruth said that really, I just found so troubling, and you and I talked about this a little in the intro about the population. The prevalence of anti-Semitism suggests something so broken in our society, suggests such an underlying sickness. I don't know how we contend with it. She says it's not about education. She says it's just about hate. How do you beat it? How do you beat that?
You beat it by being as ruthless against it as Israel has to be in beating back the actual terrorists, which is you just don't tolerate it, and you stand up and you impose consequences on the people who profess it, and you don't hide. Yeah, I will tell you that after I'm going up to college campuses all across the country because my kids play hockey, and so I'm going to be on probably 20 college campuses this fall. I just bought a bunch of Israeli flag pins, and I'm going to wear one to every friggin' game. And every college campus I'm on, I'm going to be wearing the flag. And I'm a Roman Catholic, not a Jew, not an Israeli, but solidarity. I added an Israeli flag to my Twitter profile. When you see these pro genocide people waving their Palestinian flags, put an Israeli flag on your lapel, and call them out. Don't just pass by and ignore them. Tell them, say something, call them out for what they are. And if these people come to you for a job, just say no. And we there has to be a cost. There has to be a cost. If you wouldn't hire a Nazi, you shouldn't hire somebody who is for the wiping out of the Jews.
You shouldn't hire a Nazi because that's
you
what
shouldn't hire a Nazi.
Don't hire a Nazi. There
you go. That's a good place to start. Let's not hire Nazis.
By the way, Mark,
Yep.
and we need to wrap this up, but shouldn't hire a Nazi? The New York Times fired a reporter in 2012 for tweeting that Hitler is great, right, about the Jews. They just rehired him. And God. Said we've talked to him, and he knows that was wrong. That's it. And the New York Times, OMG, this is don't hire Nazis. Don't want to hire a racist? Don't hire a Nazi. There you go. That's our advice for the week, everybody.
Yeah.
And Mark,
seems so self-evident, and yet it has to be said.
Shockingly enough. Thank you for wearing those lapel pins. Thank you for showing where you stand in public and having that courage. And everybody, let us know if you are interested in resources about this issue. If you want to support the fight, if you want to support the fight against anti-Semitism, we have a list of organizations up on our Substack that is really that's not by no means exhaustive, but is a good place to start. Thanks again.
Take care. Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.